Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Missing Link in Your Healing. Thank you, Antoinette, for carrying the can for me last week. I listened to the episode, and it was great. She's really very good, is Antoinette. It was really great, and the information you shared was really good, and it was very succinct. I learned a few things when I listened to it also. So thank you for that. So today we're going to continue our cancer conversation. We're going to speak around some of the organ energetics, some of the beliefs that might be causing the issue. And just before we head into it, and I hand over to Antoinette, I just want to say, please just remember that when we're analyzing, for lack of a better word, a disease, the energetics or the unconscious programs or the coping strategies or whatever it is, it's not like painting by numbers. There isn't a one size fits all. And so the best we can do, and we have said this before, but I'm just going to reiterate this, is that we can give an idea and we can maybe give some examples of some specific cases. I've had some clients who've had cancer, but even if you've got 10 clients that have had breast cancer, there'll be some things that are similar in all of them. And then there will be some things that will be unique to them. So please just know that this is not a definitive definition of, if you've got X kind of cancer, then this is definitely what's going on with you. No, it's not. So please take what you find useful and then just discard what you don't. That doesn't apply to you.
Yeah, thanks, Loretta. So what is cancer? Now, anybody who's got cancer here, or even those who haven't, but are thinking about cancer because it's very prolific at the moment, will probably know this, but I'm just going to reiterate it. Cancer is an umbrella term, okay? And it includes a large variety of tumors that are malignant, as in harmful, of course, and potentially lethal. Cancer cells can form in any body at any age. They invade the tissue and they find themselves in or spread through the body through the blood or lymph. Okay. Cancer cells are a natural development in every human body. So every single human being has cancer cells in their body. So why is it then for some of us, those cancer cells run riot and take over to the point that we get malignant tumors and we end up having, full-blown cancer, which potentially can be lethal? So the thing is, when a cancer cell refuses to die, it just keeps on growing and growing. So these cells then accumulate and they use up blood and resources in our body, and they starve adjacent tissue. They also put pressure on neighboring organs and tissues. And all of this can be happening over a long period of time before we present with a tumor or some symptom that's a terrible pain. Cancer can be very insidious. I know that. Mine was brewing for a very, very long time. So the usual job of our white blood cells in our body, okay, is to identify cancer cells and to destroy them. So everybody has cancer cells, but people that don't get cancer have a healthy enough immune system in the white blood cells are able to do their job of destroying the cancer cells so they don't end up being malignant tumors. But when the immune system is suppressed, this doesn't occur and tumors develop. So we're right back to immunity. We're going to take the conversation much broader than that. But just a reminder that all the different types of cancers all share a basic characteristic. They are all considered diseases of the cell in which the normal mechanisms such as growth, movement, and multiplication are disturbed. So why are they disturbed? Okay, we're not going to talk a lot now about immunity and cortisol because we've gone through it in quite a number of episodes. I will refer to those in the show notes so you can go back and listen. But cortisol is the thing. Cortisol and pumping of adrenaline is what suppresses our immunity. Cortisol is the classic stress hormone, and particularly long-term chronic stress like being upset, being fearful, anxious, worrying, being depressed this directly results in an increase in cortisol. That results in an increase in immunity. And we don't need to say more now because we've been through that a lot. That's the physiology of this. So we're not saying that cortisol causes disease. But what we do know is that cortisol and the psychological stress that caused the cortisol to pump like that definitely can contribute towards disease and to cancer. So the most important thing to bear in mind here, and we've done a whole episode or two on the unconscious programming and the fight and flight. I'll refer back to those as well in the show notes. But what to bear in mind all the time is we're not necessarily talking about obvious stress here, like divorce or a death of a loved one or moving house or a very stressful business. Those are stressful things and they can affect our health, but they're a moment in time, the body deals with them and we move on. But we're talking about the kind of stress that becomes a way of living in our modern world where we have this perception of being out of control. Okay. And if we feel out of control, we automatically unconsciously maybe go into fight or flight. And this creates profound chemical change in our body. So we've said all this. So the dangers that we face, and Loretta and I say this often because it's the truth, are internal. So I've talked about my story a lot in the last cancer episode. What are your fears and anxieties around mainly failure and rejection? Those are the things that are causing this long-term chronic stress. So research has made it clear, and I'm going to end here and then Loretta's going to pick it up with some very exciting stuff about organ energetics and other stuff, is that we do not require a major, dramatic, or large shift in the functioning of our immune system for problems to arise. You need to really pay attention to that. It doesn't have to be a drastic change. Short-term stress can cause a drastic change, but we go back then into homeostasis. But if the immune system feels that the immune system is constantly in surveillance, and Loretta talks about it as an army, and she's going to talk more. It's checking all the time, is something wrong? For example, the formation of cancer cells, and then it destroys them every day. But a small increase in the surveillance activity can swing the balance, okay? And it can cause more and more cancer cells to slip through the net and resulting in the end in clinical cancer. And all of what I've said now is based on psychoneuroimmunology, which we've told you before is a medical scientific research. And people with cancer have been shown every time to have a suppressed immune system. So that's just a summary of what we've already put out in many episodes. And now I'll let Loretta shoot with the very exciting.
Thanks. I couldn't get the mute button unmuted. Thanks for that, Antoinette. Yeah, so I think that the metaphor of your immune system as your own personal army is actually quite useful. So, you're the commander in chief and your immune system is your army. So if you think about this, what is an army? You can think of it as a workforce. If the army thing sounds, the war metaphor is a bit too aggressive for you, think of it as a workforce, right? So what does your workforce need in order to function optimally? Well, they need to have their basic needs met, right? So there needs to be enough nutrition, and there needs to be enough hydration, and there needs to be enough rest. But also, whether it's an army or a workforce, there needs to be a clear delineation of who needs to do what. Like, this is your job. These are your guard duty hours. This is your weapon. This is how much ammunition you can get. Or this is your part of the factory that you're running. And this is what the output is that we expect, and so on and so forth. This is the equipment and the machinery and your raw materials. So in order to function optimally, this army needs clear boundaries. The troops in the army need to know what it is that they are in charge of doing. The other thing is that all workforces or armies, they need dignity. They need to be treated like they are, valued humans. They need kindness, for lack of a better word, right? So they don't need sappiness, but they do actually just need to be treated as if they're valued and appreciated. So when your army is not working properly, so as Antoinette said, what happens is all cells, you have cell reproduction and cell death happening all the time in your body. And sometimes there is a glitch in the production, the way in which the cell is made. And so when you have an abnormal cell being made, your immune system recognizes it because it's on constant surveillance, and it just goes and just destroys the cell before it can replicate. Before it can replicate and duplicate and become more and more and more and eventually grow into a cluster of cells. So your army is constantly surveying. But you've got some guys who are on patrol, you've got some who are resting, you've got some who are cleaning up. That's what I mean. Like, everyone needs to know within the immune system who's doing what. So as soon as the commander-in-chief starts sowing disorganization, not clear about who needs to do what, then the troops start becoming confused. So if we don't nourish ourselves effectively, then it can affect our immune system. I mean, that's like a no-brainer, right? If we don't eat if we don't, if we're not eating well, if we're not nourishing ourselves, and by nourishing ourselves, I am talking about food here, but I'm talking about on all levels, staying away from the chemicals, staying away from the pesticides, making sure our detoxification mechanisms work effectively, hydrating ourselves enough, resting enough, all right? All of this nourishing, having relationships that nourish and support us. Those are all under the umbrella of being nourished effectively. So what ends up happening is when the army is not being fed, it's not being watered, it's not being rested, in other words, it's not being nourished effectively, the guys who are on patrol are not going to be as alert as what they could be. And that's very often when they miss the abnormal cell. And that's when one cell becomes 2 cells, becomes 4 cells, becomes 8 cells, becomes 16 cells. And before you know it, actually has its own blood supply and is like it's like a new entity that's living in your body, basically. And that's the tumor, right? And one of the reasons why treatments like chemotherapy work is because they are basically it affects the whole body, but it targets areas of huge blood supply, and tumors very often have a much more effective blood supply than other parts of the body, which is why the chemo gets to get carried to the tumor and actually can destroy the tumor or decrease the size of the tumor. So when the surveillance isn't working, you want to ask yourself, well, where is it that I'm maybe not nourishing myself effectively? And not nourishing yourself includes admitting to yourself where you have unmet needs, and possibly vocalizing that in a way that those needs can be met. This is a very important thing, So Antoinette was talking in the last episode, like, is there a cancer personality? And while there isn't necessarily a specific personality, and we talk about boundaries, being able to say no and being clear about what we'll do and what we don't do. But you know what? Being clear about what we need that we're not getting is also a boundary. And when we don't even admit that to ourselves, let alone admit that to other people in our environment who potentially are also contributing to not letting us get our needs met, that's a blind spot. Okay, so this is actually where I was leading to. So imagine your immune system. You've got these guys you've got these soldiers who are on patrol, and they're dedicated and they're willing and they want to do the job, but for some other reason, they just don't see what's going on. So you want to ask yourself this question: where is my blind spot? What am I not seeing? What am I actually not even looking for? So remember, you don't know what you don't know, eh? So this is not so that you can go on a huge guilt trip and say, oh, well, if only I'd seen this a year earlier. Well, you know what? Hindsight is a wonderful thing. But we can only do what we can do, and we can only do what we can do with what we know, which is one of the reasons why we do this podcast, so that if there's some stuff that you didn't know, you can wake up to the truth of that. So again, where's your blind spot? Where are you unconsciously not looking at parts of your life? What is happening in your life that you're not seeing? Where are you not admitting the toxicity of your relationship that you're in? Where are you not admitting that you are so tired of being a wonderful spiritual person and not being able to pay your bills? Like, what are you not admitting to yourself? What are you making a blind spot? And we did do an episode as well on toxic positivity. This is one of the places where positivity that is avoidance can be so problematic, because we refuse to actually get to grips with the reality of what are we really thinking and what are we really feeling, and what are we not loving in our lives because it's just not working for us. We've become so programmed into thinking we're not allowed to do that. So that's one of the ways in which I believe that cancer actually happens. It's depletion when we're not nourished. We're not nourished on a number of levels. And blindness, it's like, where's our blind spot? What are we not seeing? And you know what it's like when you're driving down the freeway and you want to change lanes and you start moving over and suddenly there's a car in the lane next to you that hoots because you looked in the side mirror, but the car was in your blind spot. You didn't think there was a car, so you thought it was safe to move, and then you start moving over and suddenly someone hoots at you and you realize, wow, got to get back into my original lane, because you just didn't see them. So these are really important questions to ask yourself, not so that you can torture yourself, but just like, well, where am I not looking at? What are my unconscious beliefs that I have no idea about, that these women have been banging on for 20 plus, I think we're on episode 30 episodes on our unconscious, what's going on in our unconscious, okay? So, you can go unconscious, schmunconscious, I don't care. Well, that's fine, but that's part of your blind spot. It's not good or bad, it just is. Okay, so when we refuse to acknowledge our own needs, two things. Let me just go back a little bit. When we're unkind to ourselves, when we don't treat ourselves with dignity and respect, when we beat up on ourselves constantly, that's like having an army where the discipline, because armies are known for like not being spots of extreme kindness, right? But basically when discipline turns into punishment and torture, there's a fine line there between, reality, I messed up. I'm trying to think of something. I messed up last week with a client, a potential new client, not even a client, someone that's important. Like, I know someone and this person's really important to them and they've referred this person. And I thought this person was going to send me a WhatsApp and they ended up not doing it. And they ended up just booking an appointment on my booking app, but my booking app didn't get from my Google Calendar that I'd blocked the day out. So by the time I got a message saying, hey, what is happening? I'm like, what is happening? I didn't even know I had the client. So imagine, I messed it up, right? So I had to apologize. I had to say, look, I'm really sorry. Something happened with my tech. It's my fault. I didn't check the emails, blah, 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 blah. Take responsibility for it. And then what I could have done is I could have gone, you're such a moron. You see, you don't deserve to work with clients. No wonder this person's never going to want to talk to you again. Oh my goodness, now you've not only let this person down, but now you've let the person that referred them down. And what's she going to think about? I mean, honestly, for half a nanosecond, I could see myself about to, I was like, no, you know what? I'm just human. I made a mistake. I owned the mistake. I took responsibility for the mistake. I apologized. And I gave the person options on how we could repair it. That's the best I could do. It doesn't mean that I'm a moron. It doesn't mean that I'm stupid. It doesn't mean that I'm a shit coach. It doesn't mean that I don't deserve to have clients. It means someone made an appointment. I missed the email. I was in a workshop. I couldn't take the call. I messed up. That's it. That's all. It doesn't mean anything else about me. So that's very important. The first is, how do we treat ourselves? You don't have to dig into your unconscious for that. You can just actually see what you consciously think and do, right? And the other one is like, what parts of my life am I refusing to look at? Where am I unhappy? Where do I feel as if my needs are not being met, either by myself or by anyone else? And where am I not admitting to that? Because those two things can be pivotal in whether your immune system recognizes abnormality or doesn't. Because if you're not admitting to the abnormality in your life, You see, I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this. I think that energetically and mentally and emotionally, there's already a tumor sucking the life out of you somewhere in your life before it shows up in your physical body sometimes. So, you know, you can think of it like, where is the tumor in my life? Is there a tumor in my life? Maybe the tumor in your life is the fact that you don't feel seen by the person you live with. Maybe you don't feel appreciated by your spouse. That doesn't mean your spouse is the tumor, please. It means there is this thing in your life that's essentially eroding your potential to live your life fully. Those are all questions that we can all ask ourselves. And you know what? If you don't think that you're going to be honest about the answer, ask your best friend. Like, you know, that person who's like your ride or die best friend, you know, the one that you've had for like 20 years or whatever, the one who is going to be brutally honest when you're going to say to him or her, I need you to be brutally honest with me. And I promise I might be upset after this, but I promise I'm still going to love you no matter how hard this is going to be. Because you know what? Sometimes someone else can reflect it to you better. And that person doesn't have to be an expert. They just need to know you quite well. All right. So these are all things that you can do to start identifying the blind spots. How do you treat yourself? If you were the commander-in-chief of an entire army, how are you treating the army? How are you treating yourself? Because that's all filtering down and trickling down into your army. So, Antoinette, do you want to say something before I launch into, I want to talk about some specific types of cancer so that we can actually have some tangible examples and we can tie things together.
No, I think just go for it. That was a beautiful analogy and well said. Yeah.
Thank you. So, all right. So let's go into the energy of it. So in Jinshinjutsu, you guys know about Jinshinjutsu, the Japanese healing art, which means the art of the creator through compassionate and knowing man. That is the direct translation of Jinshinjutsu. In Jinshinjutsu, they say that cancer starts in what they call the second depth of the body. And the second depth of the body is connected to the tissue that they call the deep skin. And the deep skin includes the lymphatic system. And your lymphatic system, for those of you who don't know, makes your white blood cells. So it ties into what we've just said. It's a failure of your immune system. If you don't have enough, that's the other thing. If you don't have enough patrollers, you don't have enough patrol cars on patrol, it's going to become easier for those abnormal cells to be missed. Okay. And so the health of your lymphatic system is really vital in terms of to the health of your immune system. And so in Jinshinjutsu, this deep skin level, this is where they say the cancer starts, right? Energetically, and then it's reflected physically. And the deep skin and the second depth of the body is associated with anger and not anger, I beg your pardon, sadness and deep grief. It's an inability to let things go. Now, in previous episodes, we've said, you know, our unhealed trauma, our unconscious trauma as a consequence of our conscious trauma, right? You're right. I mean, things happen to us when we have needs that are not met, when we experience trauma. We, you know, very few of us have the luxury to say, well, you know, I'm going to devote the next 2 years of my life and pure introspection. I'm going to spend a fortune on therapy. I'm going to do all the best things for myself so that I can fully heal this. You know, we tend to do the stuff on the fly because survival is really important. So we're so focused on getting over it and getting on with it that very often the physical effects of that stay behind. And that's the sadness and deep grief that I believe they're talking about in Jinshinjutsu. So it's not only grief at having lost, but, you know, I suppose all trauma, and in fact, all trauma does have an element of deep grief. You know, if you have the narcissistic parent who didn't ever value you, you grieve for the relationship with a parent that you would have longed to have that you never could have, right? Because they just didn't have the resource to do that. There's grief associated with that. And there are all sorts of other emotions, but there's definitely grief associated with that. So grief causes us to hang on to stuff. It causes us to hang on to those unfelt emotions. And here's the other thing. If anyone said to you, hey, listen, you should spend every single day, at least just half an hour out of the 24, just being sad. It's like, what? You want me to do what? You want me to be sad for half an hour out of every day? No, I'm not doing that. Thank you. The world is sad enough. Well, this is one of the problems, is that we are so repulsed by any kind of negative emotion, especially sadness, that when we are experiencing grief and loss. And so something like moving house, I'm in the process of like moving out of what was my family home. It's a long story. But, and I've done a lot of work on like closing and closure and cutting the cords and, getting real about it. And you know what? Just the other day I was packing a box and I thought, you know what? One of these days, this has been dragging on, right? The sale is really taking a long time. And like when we get the news that this is happening, I'm going to be going through the grief all over again, because every box I pack is it's like on the way out the door now, right? Everything I clean is going to be like for the last time. And one day we're going to move and I'm not ever going to come back to this property. And I'm going to have to deal with the sadness of that. So as much as I'm excited about where I'm going, there's always grief. There's always grief. So, we think of the grief as being obvious, like the death of a loved one or heartbreak. And yes, that is obvious. But every time you lose something that you feel that you can't get back, you have grief. So we experience that sadness a lot, and we don't spend much time feeling sad, and unless it devolves into pathology. Okay, so I get that, but if you are suffering from depression, you feel sad a lot of the time. I'm talking about if it's not pathological. We don't consciously actually go there. Antoinette, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to add, because that sadness and deep grief is very much part of the cancer personality in PNI, and it's unknown. I think when somebody dies or we move, we know we're sad, although we often suppress it. But if you were abandoned as a child or you had a deep trauma, and of course, it's not our parents' faults, but there's an underlying deep sadness and grief that could possibly be so repressed.
Absolutely.
Because as children, we're also not allowed to express that is the thing that works away at your immunity, actually.
100%. And the other thing is that if you've had a contentious relationship with a parent, when that parent dies, there is, I've just recently had a client who lost a parent who was difficult. Okay. Like, lots of abandonment as a child for him and and he was quite sort of blasé about the death of his mother. And I said to him, one thing you must just bear in mind is that you might not feel particularly sad because you weren't close to your mother. But with the death of that parent, there's also the death of ever having the relationship with her that you would have loved to have, because you don't have a chance now. So while that parent is alive, you still have, there's always like that little hope. Once that parent is no longer here, then that's gone as well, right? And that actually is what allowed him to connect to his grief, because he actually had deep grief about mom dying. Okay. So anyway, that was just a little segue. So the commonalities are your immune system is missing the replicating cells that are abnormal. Your army is weakened by the cortisol and the prolonged stress. And very often the lack of boundaries, that feeling of being out of control, the unconscious anger, the anger that we don't allow ourselves to feel, those things are common to everyone who has cancer. But not everyone has the same cancer, and not everyone has the same cancer in the same place. So when you can localize the area of the cancer, you can look at it energetically on a deeper level. So breast cancer is one of the most common cancers that we experience. And part of that, one could argue, is because our environment has got huge numbers of what are called xenoestrogens, and many breast cancers are estrogen-dependent tumors. So we have these synthetic estrogens in our environment, and they're in our environment through the oral contraceptives and hormone replacement, and those things end up in the water. They end up in the water table, right? So women who take those hormones, we pee them out. And they end up in the water, and they end up in the water table, and they end up being reused. Okay, so we get them from those hormones. We get them from the hormones that are put into animal products that we eat, meat and milk and those kind of things. We get them in our cleaning agents. We get them in our beauty products. Parabens are very common, preservative in creams and lotions. And they still use them prolifically in the creams and lotions that you buy off your supermarket shelf. And if you put lotion on your arms and legs every day, I'm going to try and remember this now from a long time ago. I think by the time in a lifetime, you've put about 20 kilograms of that stuff onto your body. So parabens act as estrogen mimickers. They work like estrogen in your body, but they can't be eliminated like natural estrogen can. And so we have an increase in estrogen in our environment. We're surrounded by it. It's in our food, it's in our beauty products, it's in our cleaning product, it's in pesticides, it's around us all the time. And so, I mean, there's a link there for sure. And there's a link between those xenoestrogens and prostate cancer also, because a lot of prostate cancer can also be estrogen sensitive, right? Okay, so anyway, I digress. So, but the breasts are the organs of nourishment for women. They're the organs through which we nourish our offspring. So and this area of the chest, in Jinshin Jitsu, there's a safety energy lock here in the center of the chest, in the sort of mid-clavicular line here, right in the middle of on either side of the center of your sternum. And it's called safety energy lock number 13. And safety energy lock number 13's literal translation means love thy enemy. And it's on either side of your heart chakra. And in Jinshin Jitsu, they tell us that the heart area is obviously associated with forgiveness, but it's not so much the enemy outside you as the enemy inside you. And so the front part of the chest is the area in the body. If you associate it with the chakra, it's the area through which we receive love. And the back part of the chest of the chakra is the area through which we show it. So front parts of chakras are the receiving parts, and the back part of the chakra is the giving part, is the doing part, right? And there's a safety energy lock directly behind 13. It's between the spine and the shoulder blade. Safety energy lock number 10. And it's called, this translation is the outpouring of limitless life power. So it's also known as the warehouse of abundance. So our warehouse of abundance is dependent on how open we are to receive the love and how much we can mitigate making ourselves our chief enemy. And that is about how do you nurture yourself? Because if you don't value yourself, you're not going to nurture yourself. And remember, the most common of all the unconscious limiting beliefs is I'm unworthy. And so it's the organ of nurture. So when a woman has a baby, the life of the baby becomes more important than her own, right? So she is going to, so if in starvation, in famine, the babies survive because the mother actually sacrifices her own body tissue in order to keep that breast milk going, right? I mean, that's extreme, but that's how it works. And so you want to ask yourself, where do you nurture too much? One of the common things with people with cancer is that they overgive too much of their resources, too much of their energy, it's a boundary problem. As much as not being able to put up a boundary and have people being aggressive towards you, for example, or taking advantage of your boundaries, a boundary also exists between how much do you have to give. We all hear that thing about, you can't pour from a cup that's empty. But to actually fill the cup is really difficult for us, especially because those limiting beliefs tell us that we only have value when we're being valuable to others. And yes, breast cancer occurs in men as well, I know, but in a much smaller proportion than in women, okay? And so this is really very much a problem of women. Too much giving. If I am not being of value, if I'm not being of service, then I have no value, which means I cannot be alive. So I expend all my energy outside of me. And what ends up happening is inwardly, I become angry and resentful. And then I feel guilty because of my anger and my resentment. And anger and resentment and guilt is internalized anger, and anger is externalized anger. And those are emotions associated with the liver and gallbladder. Now, the liver is the organ that's responsible for removing estrogen out of your circulation, xenoestrogens and your own estrogen. So you can't look at breast cancer without considering liver health, energetic liver health, and physiological liver health. And there's a connection actually between your lymphatic system and your liver. The liver is considered to be, well, we don't really know. So we can say it's part of the digestive system because it's like sitting up here in your upper abdomen. But your liver is like a big gland. It's a big lymph node. It makes hormones. It removes hormones. It makes bile. It regulates the health of your blood. So the way I think of it is your every single cell takes in nourishment and releases toxins, and those toxins accumulate in the spaces around the cells. And that in that liquid medium, that's called lymph. And the lymph is then channeled to areas in your body where you have concentrations of lymph nodes, glands. When we've got a really bad sore throat, you can feel these glands in these cervical glands are swollen, right? Or the glands in your armpits, or in the glands in your groin, if you get an insect bite or something like that, or you have an infection. So the lymph gets channeled to your lymph nodes, and your lymph nodes, part of what they do, other than make white blood cells, is they remove some of the overt toxins. And then the lymph is returned, the clean lymph is returned to your bloodstream. And the rest of what needs detoxifying is done by your liver. So I used to explain to my patients, your lymph are like the garbage removal guys. They're the guys in the trucks, and they get the bags and they put them in the thing, and then they take it to the recycling station, and your liver is the recycling station. So there's an intrinsic physiological connection between your lymphatic system, make your white blood cells, where your immune system is going to depend on, and your liver. And your liver is essential for removing estrogen. So, and your liver also energetically is where you house your beliefs, what you believe to be true about yourself and other people in the world, and your place in the world, and what you deserve in the world, and actually who you are. And the liver's little affirmation is, I trust. When the liver organ energy is healthy, you can trust. You can trust life to support you, which means you don't have to control it as much. Because the reason why we want to control is because of the uncertainty. I mean, I'm the queen of needing control. It's my primary limiting belief, okay? Is that if I don't control myself and others in the world, then everything is going to be completely demented, all right? But the reason why we need the control is because we can't trust. So energetically, those things are linked. So that doesn't mean that if you've got liver disease, you're definitely going to get breast cancer. No, it doesn't mean that, okay? And it doesn't mean that if you've got breast cancer, you have liver disease. I'm talking about it on the level of the organs and the organ energetics, just to show you how those are connected. Another common cancer that we have is prostate cancer. So let's not leave the men out of this. Part of the reason why prostate cancer is more common is because of the xenoestrogens, just as we said, all right? But the prostate is governed and controlled by the health energetically of the kidney. The kidney governs the health of the whole genitourinary reproductive tract, the whole genitourinary tract, right? And the emotion of the kidney is fear, survival fear, deep-seated survival fear. And the purpose, when I say the purpose of men, this is a gross generalization, but men generally are the providers and the protectors. So when we lived in tribal societies, men went and hunted, and they fought other tribes that were going to try and hurt us, and they fought wild animals that were going to attack us. They're the providers and the protectors. And so when a man on some level feels as if he's unable to provide and protect, or he hasn't provided and protected enough, or he's been emasculated by the woman or women in his life, and he starts feeling more and more powerless, it often can act as a trigger for prostate problems. And so these days we just go, oh, benign prostatic hyperplasia, benign prostatic hyperplasia, BPH. I'm so terrible with acronyms. BPH. I can never remember the damn things. It's really common. And we're like, oh, well, that's what happened to men when they get older. Well, why? Why should it happen to men as they get older? Why is it normal? 1 out of every 4 women is probably going to have breast cancer. That was a statistic. I don't even know if that statistic is still valid. It might be more than that now. But it means if there are 4 women in a room, one of them is probably going to get breast cancer statistically. That's a big risk. So energetically, if you've got prostate cancer, the question is, where are you feeling powerless? Now, you might be domineering and a bully and aggressive and controlling. But that can come from a place of extreme emasculation, feeling emasculated, feeling powerless. Think about a man who has devoted 30 years of his life to his career and then gets overlooked for a promotion. There's a certain kind of emasculation in that, depending on how he handles that, right? 100%. So in the same way in which we might say, well, women over-nurture, the over-nurturers are the ones who end up with the breast cancer, and maybe they have partners who don't meet their needs. And I mean, I'm generalizing now only in heterosexual relationships, but by the same token, men have a need to provide and protect. And if they are not able to do that, or they feel like that's taken away from them constantly, that can become hugely problematic.
And that's why retirement, you often find men get sick after retirement.
100%, because they lose that symbol of their power, that thing that if they identify with that, and their ability, and also it's so uncertain. It's like, oh, I don't know, 10 years ago, you needed X million in order to be able to retire. And every year the amount just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And we just hear about how we're living longer and longer, and essentially how our lives are going to be longer than our money is going to last. So that is an enormous burden of fear for someone who has this need to provide and to protect. Okay. So another cancer that's fairly common is colon cancer. Now, the colon is associated with a second death also. And the colon actually has a layer of lymphatic tissue in the wall of the colon, right? Interestingly enough. And colon cancer is very often literally associated with an inability to let things go. Now, or it can be letting go and walking away far too easily. So it's always going to be one of the polarities. Now you might go, oh, well, already you've just covered your bases now. No, well, I probably have. But what I'm trying to say is, in as much, think of it as hoarding, so my husband is a bit of a hoarder. He likes to keep everything in case we might need it. He's not that bad, probably because he lives with me, who's a non-hoarder. I'm like, honestly, if we haven't used it in 6 months, we must just throw it out. Someone else can use it. Someone else needs it more than I do, okay? I'm not sentimental. He's sentimental. He wants to keep things. So we could argue that if we took our polarities to the extreme, if I'm like, well, walk away, I walk away. Before you can hurt me, I'll just walk away. And I do that every time in every interaction. That is as deviated from the mean as I will cling on to everything as much as I can for as long as I possibly can and never walk away. You can see that they look like they're opposite, but they're just opposite sides of the same polarity, right? Because we're striving for that sort of middle road, okay? So colon cancer very often is associated with grief. And, sometimes what starts out as anger and frustration devolves into, it's like almost like the anger burns itself out. And when we look underneath it, there is the deep grief sitting. So again, we can ask ourselves, well, what is it that I'm not able to let go of? What am I terrified of losing? What have I lost that I've never gotten over? Those are valid questions. If you've got anything wrong with your large intestine, I mean, cancer is just an example of it. Okay. And then, of course, we can go through every single one of them, right? But the main thing that you want to know is that if you know what the underlying emotion is that's associated with the organ and the organ couple, and I think it was episode, I forget now, but there was one of them where I spoke about Jinshinjutsu, and I laid out those couples. And in fact, I think there might even have been a picture in the show notes. When you understand that, and when you can connect that, for example, to other energy centers like your chakras. So, sorry, actually, let me just go back to the breast cancer. Your breast cancer is on either side of your heart chakra. And in the center of your heart chakra, actually, it's not really in the center, but it's like in the center of your chest is your heart center. And your heart center creates this massive electromagnetic field, which is known as your heart field. It's one of the biggest electromagnetic fields in your body. And, the heart is about like being open to life. It's not just about loving things. It's about how open are you to experiencing all of life. the pain and the pleasure. So, you know, please, I'm not an expert on Tantra, so please don't any of the tantrics like blow me down on this, but the little bit that I know. So Tantra is about bliss. It's all about bliss. And we tend to think that bliss is about happiness. Bliss is about being open to experience all of life, to be able to experience it fully. It's not about that constant positive emotion. So, you know, where are you cutting yourself off from life? When you cut yourself off from nourishing yourself, you cut yourself off from life. That's in the chest area and the breast area. The prostate is in the area that's associated with the second chakra. It's associated with power. So it's that powerlessness that's associated with power in one-on-one relationships, in relation to your boss, in relation to your spouse, in relation to your career, you know, in relation to your friends. It's power in intimate connections. It's about disconnecting yourself from the power that your family of origin has over you. All those things that maybe a critical parent told you that you've taken as truth. How much power does that have over you currently in your life? It's associated with sex, intimacy, sex, connection, reproduction. It's associated with ethics. Where do you feel like you're compromising your ethics in order to survive? Which leads me down another little, I mean, I'm going to end now because I have been banging on a bit here. But, you know, ethics is associated, Jung wrote about the archetypes, that we all have archetypes. And in fact, Carolyn Mace then wrote a book about archetypes as well. And one of the things that she said was that we all have 4 archetypes in common. We all have the child. We all have the martyr. Can relate to that. We all have the victim. And we all have, no, not the victim, the saboteur. We all have the saboteur. And we all have the prostitute. And so it's, and that is, can be very, I mean, that can be very triggering for a lot of us, okay? But, you know, the question is, where do you prostitute yourself? Where do you compromise who you are in order to keep other people happy? Not even for money. It doesn't have to be for money, right? You know, where do you compromise who you are and what you believe in order to stay safe? I've prostituted myself in my career many times where I've bitten my tongue in terms of not speaking my truth of what I really believe to be true about disease and caging it as in, well, you know, the allopathic medicine isn't wrong. You know what? Sometimes, I must be quite honest with you, I just thought it was downright bloody well wrong, but bit my tongue because I wanted to play the safe game, because I didn't want to end up getting ostracized, or I didn't want my patients to think I was too weird. You know, I didn't want them to think that I was too esoteric, too weird, not grounded. That's the prostitute archetype. She's alive and well in all of us. And so this is not so that we can berate ourselves, you can just recognize it, okay? But where are we compromising ourselves constantly for safety? I see this in relationships a lot. If I had 1,000 Rand for every older woman, married woman patient that I had when I was in practice, who complained unrelentingly about their spouse, and that I said, well, why don't you leave? And they were like, no, I can't leave because of the children, and we can't separate the money, and I don't have any power of the money, and you won't give me any money. So listen, I'm not judging those people. I'm not judging those women. I'm not saying they should have left. I'm just saying that just know what you're doing. Because when that stuff's happening unconsciously, you're leeching power out of your second chakra. And that starts affecting your whole reproductive system. So men with prostates, women with cervical, ovarian, and uterine cancer. You know, where are you killing your creativity? Those are organs of life. Those are organs of creation. Those are organs of renewal and production. You know, where are you avoiding doing that in order to play it safe? So these are some, listen, this is not the ultimate truth, the way and the light, right? This is my experience of things that I have learned from people much more intelligent than me, in practices much more ancient than, I don't know, the last 100 years of Western medicine, and that I've seen with clients. that I've seen with people, because I was learning all this stuff on the side and then seeing people in my practice and going, that thing I learned in Chinese medicine, this woman, she's got this. This is how she's showing it. Or this is the form it's showing up in this man. Or this is the form it's just showing up in the child. And so, I mean, that's why I found it so fascinating. I mean, this is better than any kind of crossword puzzle, Sudoku, or anything. I'm terrible at puzzles. I hate puzzles. I find them so frustrating. But this is the one area that I'm never going to solve completely in my life. But I find it so fascinating because all you need to know you need a couple of landmarks. It's like adventure racing. You know, when people do those adventure racing, they like have a compass. They don't have a map. And then, you know, you have to like work out where you're going and you have to find the next clue. And then it's like that. All right. And so, unfortunately, you know, it would be wonderful if we just had like a clearly delineated, this is the map for breast cancer, this is the map for prostate cancer, this is the map for kidney cancer. It's not. What makes it so fascinating is that it's unique to every human. But here's the thing. Within us resides the power, the superpower, your God spark, whatever you want to call it, that communicates to you through your intuition. And if you make the time and you have the earnestness and you ask the right questions, you'll be amazed at what you're going to uncover about yourself. And what you can't uncover about yourself, someone else can help you uncover about yourself. And that is the road to healing.
Well, yeah, Loretta, and that was so magnificently said, all of it, and riveting. And the incredible thing is that we've been brought together because that was my journey. It wasn't the only part of it. It's very multifaceted healing, but it was a major part of my healing. It's coming through on the Radical Remission podcast, which I mentioned often in the Applied Psychoneuroimmunology work, Dr. Gabor Mate, and then from the ancient medicines and the homeopathy and everything that you bring. So it's absolutely magnificent that it's all actually pulling together. And it's just so wonderful that you can add another whole dimension and depth to this. And so we discussed before we came on here that we will look at healing from, not in every episode, but from a psycho-spiritual point of view. And Loretta and I kind of didn't really want to go into the spiritual, but it's kind of like when I look back at my journey and now, I mean, it's so obvious that my journey to healing my body was a journey of sacred training, is my language, because I had to work with the unconscious stuff and heal that and my limiting beliefs and coping mechanisms. And that's the very place where we become aligned with who we really are. Use whatever language you want, your God self, your higher self, the place where intuition fires, where miracles land like butterflies, really, where life comes towards you, where you trust. And I'm still a work in progress because it's a work in progress to all of us. But am I better than I've ever been? Yes. And so my journey was psycho-spiritual. Doesn't mean food wasn't an issue or exercise or meditation, but the psycho-spiritual journey. And Richard Rohr says when spirituality doesn't go to the unconscious, then it's not doing its job. And that's why Loretta and I now I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but any bypassing, whether it's health bypassing through just sticking your arm out or taking a pill or with a doctor, or if it's spiritual bypassing with using meditation to not feeling your feelings, or it's self-help bypassing by not looking at the psychological stuff and healing the trauma, not to get stuck in it, then you're not going to be well. You may not end up having cancer or autoimmune disease, but you're going to be a dissatisfied person. Anyway, I think that's enough said. So some exciting stuff coming. I can feel it.
Right. So I think that wraps up our episode for today. We've been going for 55 minutes and I banged on for most of that. Thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you so much for listening. To those of you who have listened to the episodes regularly, for those of you who are new, welcome. Lovely to have you here. And if you did find this useful, please, we would ask you if you could share it with a friend. Please copy the link and send it to them directly, because generally, if we don't do that, people don't take the time. So we will see you again next week with some more information for you to uncover the missing link in your healing.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Loretta, for today. It was amazing.